All right, great. So I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce our speaker who I met, we were talking about this, more than 10 years ago at a climate leadership event I went to at Harvard. And she was one of the speakers there. And even back then, she was such a passionate, inspiring speaker that I've just been a fangirl ever since. She is a Tufts graduate. She was an English major, and so you can do anything with an English major, really. And right now is the president and CEO of the International Well Building Institute, where she leads a global movement to advance people first places. She'll tell us more about that during her talk. Previously, when I met her, she was well, actually, you might not have been the senior vice president yet, but she was the senior vice president of knowledge at the U.S. Green Building Council, which is the organization that created LEED. So we have a couple LEED buildings on campus. USGBC is kind of administers that and developed that. So while she was there, she convened international corporations, globally recognized institutions, and government entities around a singular purpose: to put every student in a green school within this generation. She's also on the board of directors of a sort of local nonprofit that works around sustainability in higher education. It's called Second Nature, and Tufts signed their climate leadership commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050 back in 2016. And that was the same year that Rachel started at the International Well Building Institute. So without further ado, help me welcome Rachel Hodgdon. Sorry. Oh yeah, that's right, you have a mic.
Can you all hear me okay? Coming through? Okay, great. Okay, Tina, thank you. Thank you for that generous introduction. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be back periodically on campus at Tina's invitation, and to be in practically the only place I have found on earth that knows how to pronounce my last name, Hodgdon, because y'all have some Hodgdons around here. I wish I had thought to lie about that being named after me. Not as a result of my generous contributions, but helpful nonetheless. I graduated in 2003 from Tufts, and I'm going to tell you in the context of this presentation a little bit about the journey that I've been on ever since and the work that we do at IWBI. I think when I really think about it, I feel it is really odd that we frame climate as a conversation about the health of the planet. Paul Hawken, who is a renowned environmentalist and a longtime friend of mine, once said to me, "The planet is going to be fine. The survival of the planet is not in question. The planet will undoubtedly go on. What's in jeopardy is our ability to sustain ourselves on this planet." And yet, when we talk about climate change, we often frame this in the context of the health of the planet. So we show images of the planet's demise, forests burning, icebergs melting, rivers and lakes drying up. And these messages are so foreboding. They are ominous. The images themselves are remote. They're often totally devoid of people. And the effect, the mental and cognitive effect on us is to push people away, not to call people toward the subject matter. And here in the US, where shockingly, the issue of climate change remains a politicized one, despite the fact that 99.9% of scientists agree, we have repeatedly failed to move the masses from doubt and denial to intellectual agreement, to inspiration to act. And I'm of the belief that if we want to truly engage the broader population in a climate-related conversation, we have to reframe the conversation through the lens of people. We have to tell an inspiring, a hopeful, a relatable story about what we have to gain if we get this right. We have to meet people where they are and tap into their intrinsic motivations. So instead of having a conversation about fear, let's have a conversation about hope. Instead of bombarding people with the threat of scarcity, let's reposition around the possibility of abundance. Our current message is counterproductive. We're sending a message that it's too late. And I say enough with the world is dying and this next generation will be so much worse off. Let's stop talking about how things are beyond repair or already too late. There's nothing that we can do about it. These messages are paralyzing, they're demotivating, they're debilitating. Enough with the sad polar bears and poisoned animals and environments mercilessly polluted. We know that images like this are designed to shock us and scare us and fill us with dread for what's to come, and they do. Images like this may even succeed in convincing the skeptics that there is indeed a problem. But intellectual agreement alone is not inspiration to act. And better science alone isn't going to be what convinces the skeptics. A growing body of evidence tells us that this kind of negative messaging has the opposite effect of what is intended. It paralyzes us, it makes us shut down. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke at the Harvard Shine Summit. And there was a lot of talk about what we as leaders in business are doing to address the mounting eco-anxiety, the very real distress that people feel about the state of the planet and its uncertain future being experienced by our workforce. But there's still a gap in understanding how climate change shows up in the mental health of our workplaces and solutions, workplaces and communities, and what we're going to do to solution around it. Google searches for climate anxiety soared by 565% in 2021. Anthony Lazarowitz, the founder and director of the Yale program on climate change communications and a senior research scientist at Yale School of the Environment, said that in their latest nationally representative survey, around 10% of the population reported feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge about global warming at least several days a week. 9% reported being unable to stop or control worry about global warming, and 7% said they had experienced diminished interest or pleasure in doing things because of global warming. Another 27% said that they avoid thinking about climate change to address global warming. Sarah Lowe, a clinical psychologist and the associate professor in the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences, also at Yale School of Public Health, believes that collective action is the best buffer against climate anxiety. Her research has shown that anxiety about climate change was linked to symptoms of depression only in those who were not engaged in group activities to contend against it. So it turns out that purpose-driven work is the antidote. I'd like to think that many of you are here today because you are called to this purpose. I'd like to think that you believe in the power of the triple bottom line and shooting for the intersection of people, planet, and prosperity. And I hope against hope that you believe in the power of hope rather than fear, abundance rather than scarcity, that you see solutions instead of problems, that you embrace the notion that a conversation about sustainability isn't about what you or I lose, it's about what we gain. I want to believe that you are part of a rising generation that understands that sustainability is about more than impacts to the planet. It's about the impacts on you and your friends and your families. What I know is that you are part of a generation that deeply understands that climate change is real, that it's already having an impact on the lives that we lead, and that it is deeply personal. But I hope that you don't see conversations around climate change as a death knell. The work that we do to restore our relationship with the planet as a symbiotic one is an opportunity to enhance the ways in which we live our lives and to make our communities better places to live, to work, to play. Human health and planetary health at scale are the same. And I represent an organization that believes that the best outcomes are at the intersection of what's good for the earth and what's good for the people living on it. The International Well Building Institute is a public benefit corporation. We're the global authority on healthy buildings and people first places. And we're best known for WELL. It's an evidence-based framework to certify, rate, and score buildings, homes, organizations, and communities. We lead a global movement for putting the health and well-being of people first in business decision-making and culture. And we refer to this movement as the second wave of sustainability, a shift in the way that we approach the work of sustainability and the conversations that we have about it, moving from scarcity to abundance, from a focus on what we give up to what we gain, and that intrinsic motivation that we have the ability to tap into that universal desire for our families to be well, for our communities to be well, to ourselves be well, to do more than just survive, but actually to thrive. Like Tina said, I spent more than a decade working for the nonprofit that created the most impactful and widely deployed green building certification in the world, called LEED. The US Green Building Council set out on a mission to reduce emissions and inspire buildings to tread lighter on the earth through water efficiency, low emitting materials, and sustainable siting. I was hired to lead USGBC's work in schools and higher education, and eventually became the founding director of the Center for Green Schools at USGBC. And one of the best parts of my job was getting to go to LEED certified schools like this one in Montgomery County, Maryland, where I went to school, K through 12, to celebrate certifications and hand over that coveted plaque. Traveling to high-performing green schools all over the country, even all over the world, I started to hear different versions of the same story over and over again. My son needed his inhaler 3 times a week at his old school, and since coming to this new school, he hasn't needed it once. Me and the other teachers used to suffer from the 2:30 headache, which is a term that we coined for how sick we felt after a full day in the school building. Well, all of us working to advance greener, more efficient, and more sustainable buildings all over the world were coming to realize was that in building buildings to be good for the planet, we were also building buildings that were far better for people. Daylighting strategies saved energy, but also improved focus, mood, and sleep. Green roofs and green spaces cooled cities and helped with stormwater management, but they were also beautiful and became beloved gathering places for community members, not to mention the birds and the bees. Local renewable materials reduced emissions related to transport, but they also improved air quality. One day, as I was approaching my 10th year at USGBC, Rick Fedrizzi, who was the co-founder and longtime CEO of USGBC, called me and said, "I'm leaving to go run an organization that's trying to do the same thing for human health as we've been trying to do for planetary health, and I'd like you to join." And so I did, because I had seen firsthand the profound impact that the places and spaces where we live our lives can have on our health, well-being, and productivity. At IWBI, we award WELL ratings, certifications, and scores to spaces of all types, from commercial offices to college campuses, from senior living facilities to schools, all based on our WELL standard, which is the world's first building standard with actionable strategies that focus exclusively on the health and well-being of the people who use these places and spaces every day. Nearly 100,000 commercial and residential locations use WELL across more than 6 billion square feet of real estate in more than 135 countries, and benefiting nearly 30 million people every day. Our community is anchored by more than 28,000 registered and well-accredited professionals. WELL is used by 187 of the Fortune 500 and Global 500 because they understand fundamentally that investing in the health of their people pays back in terms of retention, engagement, and productivity. I'd like to tell you that these companies pursue WELL designations for an altruistic purpose, but the truth is that that's just not the case. And the only way that we've been able to make traction is to put this argument in terms that they can understand and respond to. And that comes back every time to the bottom line. WELL strategies have been validated through a rapidly growing body of peer-reviewed research and have been shown to have a positive physical, mental, and emotional health impact on the people who use these WELL-rated and certified spaces. WELL, at its heart, is a library of evidence-based strategies that includes both design-based interventions focusing on what the building or the space can do, and policy interventions focused on what the organization and its commitments to people can do. And all of this is grounded in what we refer to as 10 concepts or themes. So we divide our world and our solutions up in terms of air quality, water quality, nourishment, lighting, physical movement, thermal comfort, sound or acoustics, material health, mind, and community. Our art at IWBI is translating evidence to practice. And we know, according to the research, that these interventions drive measurable improvements in physical and mental health, engagement and productivity, recruitment and retention, and that they can massively impact the business's bottom line. We award WELL ratings, certifications, and scores to spaces of all types, from commercial offices to college campuses and dormitories, so senior living facilities to schools, even single-family homes, all based on our WELL standard. Have you ever heard of a term called the social determinants of health? Anybody here? Couple of you. Yeah. Well, if you haven't, it's possible that you've heard that expression that your zip code has more of a bearing on your health outcomes than your genetic code. So that's where that statement is derived from. And the social determinants of health are a kind of commonly held truth within the public health community, based on what we know, based on the science. What the social determinants of health have to teach us is that our physical and social environments, where we sit and who we sit next to, have a greater bearing on our state of health than our lifestyle and behaviors, our access to medical care, and our genetics combined. We believe that when places are designed and operated with intention, they can truly be a prescription for what ails us. What's amazing is that the vast majority of health practitioners don't have any awareness about the profound impact that the built environment has on health and well-being. A couple of years ago, I had the incredible privilege of doing a fireside chat with 4 former US Surgeons General. And as we were prepping for the session, all 4 of them admitted to me that during their time as the nation's top medical professional, not once did they consider the impacts that the physical environment had on health and well-being. The average medical practitioner isn't trained on any of this. And if you think about this, you'll know it intuitively. Like, when was the last time that you went to the doctor with a respiratory issue and they asked you, is it possible that there's mold where you're living? You know, those things don't happen. We're not asking those questions. We're not pursuing those lines of inquiry. Cancer, where increasingly medical practitioners and researchers believe that the primary cause of most cancers is environmentally linked. None of the research dollars go in that direction. Everything goes toward finding a cure and not toward that ounce of prevention. And so I think this represents an incredible opportunity, especially when you consider that we spend about 90% of our time indoors. A third of that time is spent at work. When I started at IWBI, there was a lot of fear from the sustainability and green building community that I had come from, that somehow a focus on healthier places and people-centric spaces would detract from or even erode sustainability and climate goals. It's a fear that all of a sudden, if we started thinking about people first, if we would be pumping so much fresh air into buildings that we would backtrack on all of this amazing progress that we were making around our energy efficiency objectives. If we prioritized quality lighting and thermal conditions, we'd be sacrificing carbon for comfort. But it turns out that that fear was really unfounded, and nothing could be further from the truth. One of our partners has found that when we shoot for the intersection of what's good for people and planet, we can actually realize even greater environmental gains and leaps of up to 15% more in energy savings compared to an energy efficient only approach. Why does that work out? Because we can deploy sensors to continuously monitor CO2 and PM 2.5 and increase ventilation only when conditions demand it. Because we can light the rooms only when they're occupied. Because we can heat and cool the zones where the people are, as opposed to the entire building. We see the greatest returns when we create spaces that are responsive to what humans actually need, and when we can respond on demand and in real time. And through this people-first approach, we can, as McKinsey highlighted in their recent Thriving Workplaces report, build strong, productive workforces and release greater individual and organizational potential. So as McKinsey said, the choice to demand a healthy workplace is one that every employee and every investor can make. And catering to what the preferences are of investors and employers, as I was saying, is vital for making the case. When I was leading the education sector at USGBC, we used to lead with the financial benefits of a green school. So like this was one of the slides in all of my decks. And it went something like this. If all new construction and school renovations in the US went green starting today, the energy savings alone would total more than $20 billion over the next 10 years. You can bet that that number is a lot higher today. The average green school we went on saves about $100,000 a year in direct savings. And then we made it relatable. So that's enough to hire 2 new teachers, or purchase 200 computers, or buy 5,000 textbooks. Okay, those numbers wouldn't work out today, but somewhere in that vicinity. And we made similar arguments for all building types. Our leading pitch was about dollars saved on energy, on water, utilities. USGBC's earliest tagline was "Build green, everyone profits." But it turns out that we were mining for savings in what accounts for about 1% of our total business costs in the first place. And yet fully 90% of our annual business costs are in our people. And so I would ask, is that not where we should be targeting our greatest returns? Is that not how we should be approaching conversations about the return on investment in committing to sustainability? This is a fascinating study that was done by Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. They found that while the 10-year NPV, or net present value for energy efficiency measures, was about $44,000 per year, if you looked at that through the lens of health and productivity interventions, by the way, many of those were the very same strategies, it would be over $2 million per year. That's a 45x multiplier. And according to a study that was recently published in the National Library of Medicine that was conducted by 3 separate universities on 3 different continents, people in well-certified spaces are 39% more likely to be satisfied with their space compared to those who are in buildings that were only LEED certified. I think that the result of that study is really no more surprising than finding that LEED certified buildings outperform well-certified buildings on matters of carbon reduction and energy efficiency. And so what this study really says to me is that healthy building strategies and green building strategies work better hand in hand. One magnifies the impacts of the other, and the many synergies make them very complementary. Please don't misunderstand me. Like, I come from the green building movement, and I am not advocating against green building certifications. I'm advocating that we make green buildings and healthy buildings more of a yes and than an either or. At IWBI, we're doing our part to make that as easy as possible. We've created crosswalks that identify synergies between WELL and all of the leading green building systems. And we've streamlined dual certification efforts by acknowledging where WELL requirements are equivalent or aligned with other green building rating pools. We also have a relatively new but already very popular offering in collaboration with USGBC that streamlines dual certifications, LEED and WELL, and reduces times on documentation by offering a harmonized certification process when we share customers. And that premise is working. The majority of well-certified projects are also certified under a green building rating. This is an example of a really amazing space. This is one of Citibank's headquarters. They achieved LEED Platinum certification in 2020 for their large-scale renovation of their HQ, which integrated 2 buildings into a single site, with a focus on human-centered design, flexible workspaces, and sustainability. It was the first building to be certified under LEED version 5 O&M rating system in the US, and it's also the largest well-certified LEED Platinum space in the world. But in addition to seeing a host of projects that pursue dual strategies for people and planet, we also see that healthy building certifications like WELL are opening the doors to a host of new customers, most especially those that are looking for solutions for existing buildings, which accounts for 98% of building stock around the world. And I would offer, if you are familiar with the green building movement, you will probably relate to the notion that LEED and other green building rating systems have been tremendously successful, even transformative in their impact on new construction, but have largely failed to move the needle on existing buildings. And thanks to the different pathways that we're able to offer through WELL, in particular our WELL at Scale program and our WELL ratings, the vast majority of buildings that participate in our program are existing. And we think that that is one of our most important successes or victories along the way. When we launched our well residential pilot a few years ago, we thought, okay, maybe we could recruit like 3,000 residences to participate in this pilot. We ended up with 30,000 residents that signed on initially to that pilot, and that grew to 40,000 over the course of the next year. But a big chunk of that was thanks to a commitment that was made by an organization called Corvius, which operates privatized housing on military bases. They enrolled 22,000 homes, all of the homes that they operate, into the program. The DoD, who also became our partner in this along the way, along with Corvius, saw well as a tool to support improved recruitment and retention of members of the military, something that they are actively struggling with today, an opportunity to address a growing mental health and suicide crisis that face so many of our troops and those that exit from the military. And they saw well as a framework to inform an evidence-based approach to addressing poor indoor air quality, mounting concerns related to PFAS and water quality, and even an opportunity to enhance sleep quality to improve readiness and responsiveness of members of the military. So in the upper right-hand corner here, you'll see a picture of me interviewing the Honorable Brendan Owens, who, as the Assistant Secretary of Defense responsible for energy, installations, and the environment, as well as all of DoD's housing, and as also holding the title of Chief Sustainability Officer within the DoD, Brendan was responsible for driving the military's commitment to healthier homes. Brendan and I go way back, which is why I chuckle every time I have to say honorable. During my tenure at USGBC, he was the head of LEED, so he was responsible for evolving the LEED Green Building Rating System. And interestingly enough, when Rick and I first left USGBC to join IWBI, he was one of those early skeptics that feared that a focus on healthy buildings and people-first strategies would somehow detract from the excellent progress that leaders in green building were making in advancing resource-efficient and climate-positive spaces. Today, flash forward, Brendan is no longer at the DoD. He was very promptly escorted out of the building just before the new administration took hold. But he does sit on IWBI's Governance Council, and that is a small group of our most esteemed advisors who oversee the integrity of the well building standard. A few days ago, we were prepping for another fireside chat that I'm going to do with him in his new position as the Chief Sustainability Officer at HKS, one of the largest architecture firms in the world, at an upcoming summit that we're hosting in London. And we were reflecting on what prompted his change of heart and this full embrace of healthy buildings and people-first places. And he told me that he had come to see this movement as yet another door for people to enter through. He sees it as an opportunity to engage more hearts and minds in this shared work, and thus an opportunity to move more people to action. The military is a really good example of this. Though Brendan's time with the DoD, as I said, ended abruptly in January, the commitment to healthier homes and barracks has not only continued under the Trump administration, it's expanded. In fact, just last week, Secretary Hegseth announced a new initiative to improve all military barracks to make them healthy, safe, and supportive, whereas upon Brendan's departure and under the new administration, most of DoD's longstanding commitments to sustainability, including their commitment to LEED certification for all of its commercial buildings, were pretty much immediately dismantled. So for the military, the case for healthier homes is clear, and it's apolitical. Improve readiness, resilience, recruitment, and retention. These are things that all of their stakeholders and the broader public and taxpayers can get behind. But of course, not everyone is sold on the prospect of healthy buildings. And I would say that the number one question that we get asked by our prospective customers is, what is the ROI of a healthy building? What is going to be the return on investment if I move forward with a well-certified space? And people often assume that when it comes to human performance, the gains are hard to measure, like they're soft, they're squishy, they're more qualitative than quantitative. And so for the past decade or so, my organization has been on a mission to debunk that myth. We've been amassing all of the best third-party peer-reviewed research and customer case studies to definitively prove that investing in health pays back. and to be sure that our customers and our consultants and our community have the evidence they need to make the case for people-first, health-focused strategies that generate real returns. A few weeks ago, we released the second edition of our Investing in Health Pays Back special report. And that report highlights a host of third-party peer-reviewed studies. This one is from the American Journal of Health Promotion, and it found that effective well-being programs can reduce healthcare costs by as much as 24.5%. According to the McKinsey Health Institute, investing in holistic employee health could generate nearly $12 trillion in global economic value and boost global GDP by up to 12%. In this seminal study of well-certified buildings published in Buildings and Environment, focusing on the health and well-being of employees through the application of the well building standard delivered returns that were truly exceptional. So exceptional that sometimes I'm afraid to show people this study because these numbers are practically unbelievable. Boosting workplace satisfaction by up to 28%, improving productivity by as much as 10%, increasing well-being scores by up to 26%. These are not hypothetical analyses. These are real results on average across a cohort of certified buildings. And so what we learn in total from this and some of the other studies that are captured in the report is that when people are healthier, businesses are also healthier. And so what if, like the American Society of Interior Designers who certified their Washington, D.C. headquarters, we could decrease employee absenteeism by 19%? Or what if, like CBRE, which is a global real estate company, we could reduce turnover by almost a third and double our hiring rate for new talent? What if, like Landsec, which is one of our customers in the UK, we could increase productivity by 30%? The impacts on our businesses would be profound. In the report, we also highlight improvements that can come from singular strategies. So for instance, better performing systems that provide for increased ventilation rates to lower CO2 buildup can significantly impact productivity. For one of our customers, Colliers, as much as $7,500 worth of productivity per person per year. And as I mentioned, the use of sensors and other emergent technologies can help balance energy loads while improving air quality at the same time. We've also come to understand that a lot of these same improvements have a profound impact on human performance. So this organization, BCCI, realized cognitive function improvements of 101% and saw a significant rise in employee satisfaction with the indoor environment. I really love this quote by our friend Natalie Devlin, who's the Chief Experience Officer at Charter Hall, which is a real estate company that's based in Australia. She said today's successful businesses have to put sustainability and wellness at the very heart of their actions. And by balancing these, people and planet can thrive. So let me leave you with this call to action. Let's all commit to having conversations about sustainability in a much more human voice and to repositioning the case through the lens of the human experience. We have to remember that the impacts of climate change, the ones that we're most concerned about, like rising seas, a warming planet, intensifying weather events, out of control fires, the impacts are human. As we race to meet our Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 goals, to come into compliance with a growing number of global regulations, to show investors that we are competently and confidently managing risk, we have to do so in a way that puts people and their health at the center of the decisions that we make. Sustainability isn't about the ability of our planet to exist. It's about our ability to subsist on the planet. It's about our ability to thrive. And so I hope that you'll consider downloading a copy of this report on investing in health pays back to get the full scope of how focusing on people first places everywhere and for everyone matters more than it ever has before, because environmental health and human health at scale are one and the same. And if we care about sustaining the health of both people and planet and leaving a living legacy for our children, we all know that there's no time to waste. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I am here to take questions. Who wants to start?
First, thank you for your talk. As a planning student, it's really interesting to get the different perspective of like, how do we build intentionally with like people in mind? So I was thinking about what you were saying about like the social determinants of health and how much the physical environment affects people's like ability to just like live and survive and all of this. I'm wondering how that lens maybe plays into like equity, and how you all potentially like bring this to communities that are really struggling with air pollution, water pollution, and how maybe that has been embraced or hasn't been embraced in
Yeah.
certain communities.
I love that question, especially because what we know is that from an environmental perspective, the people who have the least suffer the most. The poorer you are, the more likely it is that you're living on a contaminated site, that you're living in a place with unhealthy materials, with inadequate air quality, contaminated water. The list goes on and on. And so we believe that it's vital to think about how we can have an impact on those communities, that affordable housing, those schools, those workplaces. And oftentimes in the grand scheme of market transformation, if you've ever seen that curve of like where it starts with early adopters and then at the other end you have laggards, oftentimes it's the projects that have the greatest means that are the early adopters, and the laggards account for lower budget projects, which again map directly to low income communities. So we've done a couple of things to try to address that. One of them is through a really cool partnership that we established several years before we even started work on our own residential certification with an organization called Enterprise Community Partners. They have a certification, a green certification for affordable housing. And it is extremely popular within the United States. It's only available within the United States, but it's extremely popular because most affordable housing happens through public-private partnerships, incentives, tax breaks, permitting, expediting permitting, et cetera. And so a lot of the affordable housing incentives at the local and state levels are actually tied to enterprise green communities. So you have to achieve that green certification in order to get the funding, which actually means that percentage-wise, there's more saturation of green buildings in new affordable housing developments across the United States than in Class A offices, for instance. Pretty amazing. And this is like where like an understanding of sustainable finance and how these goals can be realized through sustainable finance is like so critically important to the work that we do. So we, a couple of years ago, said, we don't want to wait for low-income housing to be the beneficiaries of the healthy buildings movement. And so pro bono, our standard development team worked to embed our well criteria into enterprise green communities. And what that amounts to is that under their current version of enterprise green communities, you have to do both, like both health and human health and planetary health. And when you finish the process, it results in a co-branded plaque. So enterprise green communities plus well. That's one example. Around the time of the pandemic and people marching in the streets for George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, we started work on a product called the Well Equity Rating. And that was an effort to put a finer lens on the research and the translation of research into action that actually pointed to specific strategies within the built environment or organizational practice that had an outsized and demonstrated impact on marginalized or underrepresented communities. So we looked at people who have been historically minoritized, Black, Brown, and Indigenous here in the United States, differs outside of the United States. We looked at people with physical disabilities, people with who are neurodivergent, LGBTQ+, primary caregivers, women and girls, et cetera. And so we mapped those very specific strategies and brought them into a singular rating that said, like, if you are looking to elevate outcomes related to diversity, inclusion, and belonging, these are the specific strategies that you'd want to consider. And we even introduced a series of filters within our larger system, as well as within the rating, that would allow you to say, like, in my workplace, I know I'm catering to a lot of women, or in my workplace, I want to recruit more women. And so you could actually apply that filter and go, okay, the research shows that these particular strategies will have an outsized impact. I think the most fascinating thing about that work was that we came to understand that when you design for the extremes, everyone benefits. like when you design for the extremes, it benefits the means. And not everywhere in the world, DEI is a 4-letter word, but it has become one here. And so I will also say that one of the things that we had to do when Trump took office and this attack on DEI began was go back and edit out any of like the suddenly incendiary or politicized terms from our standard. To be honest, I wish we had done that from the start. That would have been the smarter thing to do. Was to really think about like how could we neutralize the language that we were using so that these things couldn't come under attack. And we felt really heavy about that at my organization. Like we were really mad. But in the end, I think it landed us in a better place because you can imagine that in the work we do in the UAE, for instance, it's off the table to talk about bathrooms that are friendly to trans individuals, but it's not off the table to talk about single stall bathrooms. You know, that a man who has a child and needs to change their diaper could use, but also somebody who wasn't comfortable being in a public bathroom setting. And so I think a part of what we learned from that experience was that, you know, to be the evangelists of some of these concepts, we actually have to take the feelings, the political charge out of the work that we do. And so that work continues uninterrupted. And what I am really pleased to say is that we've seen interest rise precipitously in countries outside of the US, including in countries I never expected, like Saudi Arabia, for instance, or Singapore. And that within the United States, a lot of our well-at-scale customers, so these are our largest corporate customers, have continued their pursuit of the well equity rating, albeit often in a confidential fashion. And so I think that most of the companies that we work with remain very committed to DEI and inclusion, but are often doing it like us under different words and different branding.
So I know that you need, okay. Okay, hi. Thank you for your talk. It was really great. So I know that LEED has different competitors in terms of sustainability building certification frameworks. And I was wondering if WELL has any that you compete with. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another really good question. So I often say, like, when people say, who's your greatest competition? I will say the biggest competition is the status quo and how easy it is to keep doing the same things over and over again. The fact of the matter is that we have so little saturation when we look at the total building stock all over the world, even though I can't remember what the stat was, but like 6 billion square feet would make us one of the 10 largest countries in the world. You know, it's a lot, but it's still a little. And so I don't think we're so much competing with other healthy building certifications, and there are some, so much as I think we're competing with people's desire not to change and to keep on doing what we're doing. And also for many of our customers, just the crush of responsibilities that they have to come into compliance with sustainability regulations and policies and all the reporting and documentation that goes along with it. I would also say that in a strange way, you could almost say accurately that green building certifications have become our biggest competitors because they have increasingly seen this proposition as vital to their own survival, which I think is a really good thing, like the story I was telling about Brennan, and they're embedding more and more health within their own systems. Unfortunately, in that fight for survival, a lot of them are also messaging, you know, to the extent of like, why do you need a healthy building? Like, you know, you can get it all from a green building certification. And that's why I think showing that slide about WELL spaces outperforming, for instance, LEED spaces on matters of human experience is a really important one. Like, we didn't commission that study. We had no idea that it was happening. But I think that it shows that, you know, you'll get those additional gains with that extra added focus on human health and well-being. And ultimately, I think it's a really positive thing that organizations like USGBC see human health more and more as their mandate. Having worked inside of USGBC, I can say that that was a very hot topic for a number of years. We had people walk out of board meetings because there was this entire contingent that really did think that expanding to a focus on human health would detract from the goal. And then there were other people who I think were early vanguards in seeing this notion of human health and planetary health as being one and the same. And so I probably wouldn't have left USGBC if they had sort of wholeheartedly embraced that notion. But because I was working on schools, I saw it faster, I think, because the core goal of a school is to nurture the children inside of it. And the effects on human health were so incredibly apparent. So if all of this lands in us doing such a good job that we put ourselves out of business and more and more health comes into green buildings, and in fact you really don't need the yes and you can get that both in one system, I probably won't view that as a failure, and maybe they'll rehire me.
Thank you. Sinette, are there any questions online? Okay. Other questions in the room? I have a question. So some of the things that make well building certification different than LEED are that I believe some of the credits relate to programs that instead of like physical things. Can you talk a little bit about some of those?
Yeah, so we do a lot. LEED does a little bit of this, but we do much more of thinking about like a balanced set of strategies between what the building can do through design and operations and what the organization can do through programs, policies, amenities, healthcare benefits. And we find that you really can't separate those out. So to the extent that LEED does have those programs and policies, they're mostly appearing in their O&M, their operations and maintenance rating system or certification, and have been segmented out from the design related strategies. And I think the thought is that different stakeholders shepherd those things through the process. When we were working on well version 2, when I first started at IWBI and I was leading that effort, we came to this fork in the road where we had to decide whether we were going to try and separate those things out, because at that point there was only one version of well, or whether we were going to keep them together. And our client facing team, I'll never forget that meeting, said like, whatever you do, don't make that separation, because these strategies, they have to go hand in hand. Like I gave an example last night in Tina's class, very straightforward one. The head of well-being at Google years ago said, everybody keeps congratulating me for having meditation rooms in all of our offices, but they're always empty. And it's like, right, because when you have a butts and seats policy, nobody's going to use the meditation room. And when there's a stigma associated with mindfulness practice and not a robust, approach to education, people aren't going to take you up on that implicit offer. But we see that over and over again. And so like another good example of that has to do with dining areas, right? So we want nourishment is one of the concepts within well. And we know that people will do their best work when they're eating healthy, nutritious food, but also when community is a part of that experience and people aren't just sitting at their desks eating. But it's not enough to build a beautiful dining room. It turns out you also have to have a culture where even people at the top take time out of their day to eat lunch together. And the business acknowledges that as a productive exercise that advances the work, not one that keeps you from doing more of it. And so we've kept those strategies fused. It's definitely something that makes well challenging. Of course, you can choose to focus on the strategies that you have control over. But I think it's been really interesting to like see in some ways an expanded remit of like a architecture firm that's having these conversations for the first time and actually establishing a shared vocabulary with their clients about the policies and the programs that are going to be supportive of these design strategies. I can't tell you how many times I have been to like on a tour of a green building or like a tour of a green school, and like the architects are almost always leading the tour and they're like so proud and they want to like take you down to like the HVAC rooms. You can like check out all the building controls and stuff like that. But like how often as a part of that tour, like, you're standing in the library and they're like, and look, we created this library filled with daylight, but when you need it to, the space to cater to, multimedia presentations, like you can flip the switch and the louvers come down and the, and you won't get that glare anymore. And the librarian standing there going, I didn't know it did that. Or like walking into a classroom and they're using the light shelves to bounce light further in the room as bookshelves. Or my sister, whose first job was here in the Boston area, and she said, you would hate my classroom. It has no windows. And I was like, that is horrible. And I went on a visit when I was in town, and I was like, Bess, your classroom has windows, but like the teacher that you're supporting is like such a hoarder that she's piled the books and the stuff to cover up the daylight. And so when you don't have that education, when you don't have those policies and those supportive practices, you just don't get the kind of impacts that you're looking for. But I think that oftentimes those things either aren't considered to be within the purview of, you know, the leaders that are championing the project, or they get value engineered out along the way.
Great, thank you. Questions in the back.
Hi, we have an online question.
Oh, great.
I get that while it's holistic and all these areas are important, that said, what's the one thing, the one area that needs the most attention? How can this audience help?
Ooh, that is a hard question and a really good question. So I would say what's most important is context specific. So I think that's an important thing to start with. Like, we really encourage our project teams to start with an integrative approach and to really engage with stakeholders across the community. Shocking how little that happens on a new build. And to understand like what ails this community, you know. In the work that we've been doing with military housing, water is literally poisoning families and the fence land communities that live around those areas. In the military knows that this is a problem, yet they haven't, it's not a problem that they have a solution for yet, because there are a lot of critical functions that the military undertakes that involve forever chemicals, that involve PFAS, and today they don't have solutions yet to replace them. So this is a problem they're going to continue to contend with. So if I were someone in the military, I would say like my number one goal is to address water quality. But I do think that one of the best ways to bring people into this conversation is to talk about air, to talk about air quality. I think in part because it's becoming, the problem is becoming so much more visible to us. You know, you saw those images during the pandemic of like, you know, what Bangalore or Shanghai or LA looked like, you know, before the pandemic, and what it looked like during the peak pandemic. And during peak pandemic, when nobody's driving into work and nobody's going to school and riding the school bus, and, you know, most of the buildings weren't at full operational capacity, the skies were clear. You know, we're contending with the impacts to our families and our friends and our communities and our homes that wildfires are having. You know, we can like see this problem. And so I think it's something that exists as a topic that we can relate to, that we can connect with. It also exists as one of the places where we're making the biggest gains from a technology standpoint. And the ability, for instance, to monitor our air quality in real time and really understand like what is impacting air quality at any given time, and to be able to address that with meaningful solutions and affordable solutions, I think makes this like a really accessible point of entry. It's also an opportunity to save more than 200,000 lives a year through some, because these things are preventable. So recently we launched something called the Global Commission on Healthy Indoor Air. We got to launch it at the UN during UN General Assembly and Climate Week a couple of weeks ago, and they called it a side event. Like my head of policy was like, "You're going to speak at this like side event at the UN." I'm like, "Okay." I thought it was going to be like a conference room full of like a couple of people. I walked in, this is the second largest space in the UN where delegates congregate. It's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And it was amazing to like see this issue taking center stage, because it hasn't been one that historically gets a whole lot of attention. And I think if anything, we have focused more on outdoor air quality, but it turns out that indoor environments are on average about 3 times more polluted than outdoor environments. So this whole idea that like, just go inside and like shut all your windows and turn off your HVAC system and you'll be safe is a falsehood. And so I do think that if we can personalize this issue, we can take it farther. For me, it is personal. My mom has permanent respiratory damage from being in sick classrooms during her time, ironically, in Montgomery County Schools, one of the first districts in the country to have a green building program. And we call her the canary in a coal mine, because she can like walk into any space and with minutes she'll know if there's a problem with mold or some other toxin just because she can't breathe. And so we recently designed a multi-generational home here in Massachusetts with my parents, and air quality was our top concern and our top area of focus. So we have air quality monitors throughout the house. We have continuous ventilation, and the house is also net positive. So we did it without sacrificing on energy efficiency goals too. We moved out of our last apartment in New York City, where I spend most of my days, because my 1-year-old son was having respiratory issues that we tracked to the mold that was accruing in our very lovely apartment, but where there was a design installation problem that the owners didn't want to fix. And so I think when you are someone who's suffering or know someone who's suffering acutely from those issues, just more inspiration to act, and knowing that there are viable solutions, I think is really empowering. Some of the concepts that we promote, like acoustics, tend to be more expensive and more onerous to address once a building is already designed, but not so much with air quality. There are a lot of like very affordable Band-Aid fixes, and thanks to the pandemic, a huge and very fast proliferation of good technologies.
I think that's such a good point. People can bring their own food, they could bring ear muffs, but you can't bring your own air.
Yeah, yeah. And it's one of those things where, like, if you do right by the building, everyone's going to benefit. Like, you don't have to opt into it, right? It's a passive benefit.
Hi, I'm Heidi Sokol. I'm with Campus Planning and also a registered architect. So over the years, when we are doing envelope window replacements or not, we're always fighting with the engineers, owners, to not seal the building
Yep.
with not operable windows. I
Yep.
mean, I can mention a bunch of buildings around here where we did compromise.
Yep.
Are engineers, like mechanical engineers, touching base with you all? I mean, it seems that they're working in a vacuum
Yeah.
just to make the building efficient. And
Yeah.
that's their priority. And they don't understand that, well, the mechanical system doesn't always work. You can't
Yeah,
put the windows in.
Brendan was actually confessing the same thing. He was talking about how he got his start in his career, and he started out doing performance contracting. And one of the ways in which they met the energy efficiency goals that would then pay for the project itself was to basically like set it up so that there was less air coming into the building. And he felt ultimately kind of bad about that. It was one of the things that prompted him to move into green buildings. So I do think it begins with a challenge with education. And we know that this is not built into the curriculum of a lot of engineering schools. Increasingly it is, and even more so with architecture. So that makes me really hopeful. Green building systems like LEED have emphasized the importance of operable windows. Others like Passive House have emphasized more of a tight envelope, but certainly you can do both. So I do see that there's progress there. I think that there are a few things that are driving that progress. One of them is continuous monitoring and technologies that make visible the invisible and show you the compromises that you're making in favor of having a healthy building or an efficient building. And I think that, there are other aspects of automation, like signals that can be built into the building that signal when it is time to open the windows. And then when windows are opened, the HVAC system automatically powers down. And of course, there are other opportunities to do a really tight envelope that in a circumstance where there aren't operable windows, but there can still be continuous ventilation. So there, I think the struggle is convincing an engineer that you're not sacrificing performance in order to have something like that. And so, again, to use my house as an example, almost every single window in the house is operable. We have these huge glass sliding doors, and they all have screens so that we can have open air as much as possible. But we also have continuous ventilation for when the house is buttoned up, and we've done all of that in that net positive environment. So I think the more that people are exposed to examples like that, the more they're like, I see, this is like not an either or. But the biggest issue is, like I said, education and like the desire to just keep doing things the way that you've always done things. Never underestimate the power of that to slow change. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Well, and this report has
sorry.
research that speaks to that. So if you're ever looking to make the case, this has got some really good stuff. That too.
I'm gonna cut you off for a second, Heidi. So we are out of time, but I was wondering if you could take 10 seconds. You're an English major. If people here wanted to work in the green buildings, could you just really quickly say some of the background of some of the staff, some of the people, like were there other English majors?
Oh yeah,
All the architects?
I've met and employed a lot of English majors along the way, philosophy majors, urban design majors, architecture majors, building science majors. Like people come from all over. Sustainability is necessarily a hodgepodge of people who have different professional and educational backgrounds. So I wouldn't let that deter you, and you'll be amazed, I think, as I have been, at how what seems like totally unrelated skill set comes back to help you in the long run. And I'm so grateful for the good writing skills that I have and the good analytical skills. And so, yeah, all are welcome in the sustainability movement and all are needed. So don't let whatever your major was make you think that you have to be on some type of straight and narrow path. I've done a lot of wandering. And as I was telling one of Tina's students I met with earlier, none of the positions that I have held existed when I was in college. And the statistics or the research shows that's exactly the same for you. And in fact, the biggest growth opportunities that I've found in my career are in white spaces, new spaces that aren't congested, where there isn't a lot of expertise and there isn't a lot of competition. And so within the space of a couple of months doing an unpaid internship at a green building program at a public school, I became one of the world's most, experts in green schools, because who was an expert in green schools back in 2006? The answer is almost nobody. So that's my parting advice, I guess, for those of you that are thinking about what to pursue in your careers. Like, flow to those white spaces, because I think you'll find the fastest opportunities for growth there. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks
Thank
so
you so much.